Today we are in Psalm 14, and if you know this psalm, it's probably because of the very first verse. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. And if you've heard anything about this verse, you think that's about how foolish it is to be an atheist. But is it really? I want to propose an alternative explanation. And the main thing is, I just don't even think in David's day the idea of atheism as we think about it would have made sense. We're basically importing our thoughts about atheism, the belief that God doesn't exist, to the ancient times. Nobody would have thought that way. And if it doesn't mean that, the question is, what does it mean? The early Christians, they were sometimes called atheists. And what was meant by that is not that they didn't believe in God, but that they didn't believe in the Roman pantheon of gods. And because of that, they were attacked as being atheists. The idea that you wouldn't believe in any God at all just didn't make sense. But notice it says, the fool says in their heart, there is no God. The fool. The fool is a common character in the Bible, especially in Proverbs. And if we're to think about what a fool is in the Bible, it's not about their intelligence. It's not about whether they're smart or dumb. A fool in the Bible is someone who doesn't listen to counsel, doesn't listen to the advice of others, thinks that they can do things on their own strength without the need for others, doesn't listen to the wisdom of those older than them. In the Bible, it says that foolishness lives in the heart of the child. And as a parent, it's one of the jobs of a parent is to drive that foolishness out of the child's heart. Well, the fool in this case is someone who believes that God doesn't see what I do. God doesn't see the sin I'm committing, the wrong I'm doing. In effect, it's as Pastor Doug Wilson called it, this passage is about functional atheism. That is living your life not with a philosophical commitment that God doesn't exist, but living your life as if God doesn't exist and it doesn't affect how you act in the world, as if God doesn't have an effect on the things we do. I'm thinking about Psalms 10. The wicked person in Psalm 10 says that in the pride of his face, the wicked does not seek him. The wicked doesn't seek the Lord. All his thoughts are, there is no God. His ways are prosper at all time. Your judgments are on high out of his sight. Verse 11 in Psalm 10 says, he says in his heart, God is forgotten. He has hidden his face. He will never see it. And verse 13 says, why does the wicked renounce God and say in his heart, you will not call to account? And that's really the rub of functional atheism. It's whether we say that aloud or not. Remember, the fool says in his heart, it's not the fool writes this down. Whether we say it aloud or not, or we live our lives as if what God says doesn't matter, and that God doesn't see the sins I commit. And the thing about functional atheism is you can be a member of a church in good standing. You can go to church on Sunday morning, but you are functionally an atheist if when you leave that service, it doesn't affect how you live your life, and you harbor sin in secret, and you hold on to that sin, and you live as if God doesn't see, God doesn't know, God doesn't care. And Paul picks up on this in Romans. He picks up on this idea of living for yourself, living as if you're your own God. And he picks up this verse, they have all turned aside, together they have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. This is a God's eye view of mankind. And the God's eye view of mankind is corrupt and evil, and they do not submit to God's will. They have no knowledge. This, as Psalm 14:4 says, they have no knowledge. But the hope of Psalm 14 is a hope that we who at times all live as functional atheists, even the believers among us, we live and we do things and we act as if we are the gods in our lives. Not only do we act as if God doesn't exist, but there are times we act as if we are the gods in our lives. And we shape our God to look just like us. But the hope of Psalm 14, the hope of David, was that salvation would come out of Zion. And our hope as believers today, as we look at the wreck of our lives, if we look at the wreck of people's lives who live as if God doesn't exist, is that salvation has come out of Zion. Christ has died and his blood covers us and he pours his grace into our lives, overflowing, so that he takes control of our lives, so that our sinful tendencies, these strongholds in our lives are defeated and torn down, and as he shapes us more and more into his image rather than us trying to shape him into our image. The Lord, as Psalms 14:7 says, the Lord has restored the fortunes of his people by saving us and rescuing us from our functional atheism. Would you allow God's transforming grace to shape you evermore into the image of his Son?